Welcome to Backstage Pass with Gail Davis, your invitation into the world of keynote speaking and event planning expertise. Join us as we pull back the curtain and dive into exclusive interviews with speaking industry experts. From seasoned speakers to master event planners, we're here to provide you with the ultimate backstage experience. Get ready to unlock valuable insights, tips, and strategies that will elevate your events and leave your audience inspired. Hello, my name is Gail Davis, and I am your host for Backstage Pass. Today, we have one of our current favorite speakers, Jason Harris. He is a best-selling author. He is a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and he is a professional pilot. His high-risk combat experience helped him build this foundation that he refers to as the no, fail, trust methodology. We're going to get into that a lot later. That methodology helps leaders and teams build a culture that's rooted in trust, accountability, and performance. Today, we're seeing that our clients, the organizations that we serve around the world, are turning to Jason when they're looking for practical strategies to strengthen trust, lead through uncertainty, and build teams when it matters the most. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me, Gail. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and have a conversation with you today.
Well, I think I want to dive right into your high-risk combat experience. What is, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so for me, I've deployed 11 different times in combat as a pilot, as an officer in the Air Force. I did 4 combat deployments flying C-130s. all around Iraq, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and other places. And then I followed that up with 7 combat deployments and special operations, flying small airplanes in the midst of combat in the middle of Iraq. All of that between 2004, 2011. And so when I say high risk combat, it's like, no kidding, you have the potential of getting shot at. You're engaging in operations where you're working with tier 1 high level performers on the ground, executing missions to take out high value targets. And there's always a high level of risk in everything that we were doing, from the takeoffs to the landings to how we operated in the air, managing teams, managing other airplanes in and around us, avoiding hitting other airplanes, and of course, avoiding getting shot at and making sure that we got people back safely from the battle space.
How do you avoid getting shot at? If they're trying to shoot you down, how do you avoid that?
Well, we so that's a great question. So, when you're in combat in a contested environment, there are different tools or different weapons that people will use to shoot at you. Sometimes it might be what's called AAA or anti-aircraft artillery. So imagine, instead of like a pistol or a rifle, it's like a really big gun with really big bullets.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're aiming directly at you. Sometimes they're just indiscriminately spraying across the sky, seeing if they can hit you because they can hear you. And then other times they're launching rocket-propelled grenades, or they're actually launching surface-to-air missiles at your aircraft or where they think your aircraft is at. And so you have to execute maneuvers to avoid being hit. And so some weapons, they can aim at you. Some weapons, they can kind of, like I said, they can kind of try to blanket the sky. And then there are some weapons that actually, when they launch them off, they track on the heat signature of your aircraft. And so you have to execute maneuvers to get that surface-to-air missile away from your aircraft. And then you do evasive maneuvers to avoid that weapon hitting your aircraft.
Okay, you have convinced me. You have been in high-risk combat situations. and I don't want to go any further without saying thank you for your service, because that is... that's what it's all about. And sincerely, I told you I'm from Altus, Oklahoma, so I have a love for guys in the Air Force and all you all do to protect our country. So that's awesome.
Just really quickly, before you move on from that, I used to struggle when people would say, thank you for your service. And I did an event for an organization in the construction space. And a gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, hey, do you know Nicole Malachowski? And I says, why, yes, I do. She's a good friend of mine. And he says, I'm a veteran. And she gave an answer that I've never heard before, which was the greatest answer. I said, well, what's that, sir? He says, she responded, you're worth it. And so now when people say thank you for your service, I give a similar response and say the American people are worth it. So It was an honor and a privilege to serve this nation. And, like you said, you being from Altus, Oklahoma, I love the support that community gives to our military community there in Oklahoma. And so thank you for the support. Thank the American people. And again, the American people are worth it. And it's been an honor and privilege to serve this nation.
That's incredible. When did you leave the Air Force, Jason?
So I started the Air Force Academy at their prep school in 1996, went to the Air Force Academy itself 1997, graduated 2001. I served on active duty from 2001 until 2013, and then I became a reservist, and I continued to serve until 2023 as a reservist. And so I retired in October of 2023, finishing up as a KC-46 tanker pilot and squadron commander for a unit out of McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita, Kansas.
Did you find transitioning out of the military into a civilian life a big adjustment, or just another day?
For me, it was a little bit different, Gail. And the reason it was different was because I had already started making that transition when I became a reservist. And then the other thing that happened for me that helped me out was when I came back to Colorado Springs in 2011 to teach at the Air Force Academy. I was teaching in the Military Strategic Studies Department. I was being mentored by different people in the community, and I started getting involved in the community. So I became a commissioner on the Airport Advisory Commission for the Colorado Springs Airport. I started serving on some of the local boards, and I started expanding my network outside of the military, and I began to understand what was possible beyond the institution of the military. And so my transition was a lot different than a lot of people who only insulate themselves with the military community for the entirety of their career. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, they're going, hey, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. Now what do I do? So it wasn't as hard for me. And I've actually helped coach and mentor folks that are transitioning because it is challenging.
Yes. Yes. How long have you been speaking? That is what we're here to talk about today, but I'm just loving getting to know you and piecing it all together.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is the thought that immediately popped in my mind is I've been speaking a long time. I remember when I was in elementary school in Oakland, California, and one of the roles that I played was George Washington Carver in a play. And so I had a speaking role. I don't have a clue what I had to say, but since I was a kid, I've been doing different things, whether it been in church or at school and in the community. But professionally, I started doing Toastmasters when I came back to teach at the Air Force Academy. And then a good friend that you and I both know, John Register, says, hey, You're actually a really good speaker. You have some really good stories. Why don't you come and check out this organization called the National Speakers Association? Fast forward to not lengthen the story too much. In 2018, I decided that I would venture out and start professionally speaking. And that was kind of the genesis of my professional speaking career.
That's awesome. Sometimes when people have a military background and we pitch them as a speaker for a large international audience, sometimes we get a little pushback from the event planners that say, we have an international audience. How would you respond to that if I told you that I had a great client, they have a big sales kickoff, they've got 2,000 people there, and it's international, and they want to be sensitive to that?
Well, the first thing that I would say is, for me personally, number one, I understand and I empathize with their concerns. While the military was formative in who I am and who I've become, it's not who I am as an individual. I'm a standalone individual. The military has informed how I operate, how I think, and it's allowed me to gain an awareness of the world. So I've traveled the world in the military, I've traveled the world outside of the military, and I've learned how to exist as a person with that background, but not use it as something that I lead with. So I've traveled to Sri Lanka on international envoys where I've taken Air Force Academy cadets, and you had to know how to operate in a civilian perspective and not be highlighted as military. And then also have to communicate and operate with some of the most high level military members in that country. I did that in Japan and some other places. And then in my own career, my own space, I've traveled the world and I had the ability to learn what it means to exist having a military background, but not allowing that to get in the way of how do we connect with each other. And at the essence of our humanity, it doesn't matter if I'm in the military or not. The question is am I going to treat you like a human? And am I going to respect you for who you are, respect you for your perspective, and respect you where you're at? And so when it comes to an international organization for a sales kickoff, no matter what country they might be from, no matter how many different countries they bring to their event, while yes, my background was fortified to military, I'm not talking to a group of military people. I'm talking to a group of sales professionals. And I guarantee you, I'm going to give them something through the course of stories and nuggets of wisdom and knowledge and content that they're going to be able to execute on. And it has absolutely no bearing on the fact that I served in the military. I'm not going to get on the stage and I'm not going to talk about things that don't deserve to be talked about in front of their audience. And so I make sure that I respect that. And then the last thing that I would say, Gail, is that one of the things that I've done in my military career is I had to be an expert in logistics, supply chain, and then work in command centers that were what we call joint environments. So I've had to work with people from other military services and senior leaders from other militaries around the world. So that's one of the unique things that I bring to the table is I've already had that level of experience of dealing with people from multiple different countries at one time and understanding that they see the world differently because they have a different perspective. And so when I blend all of that together and deliver on a stage, very quickly you'll forget about the fact that I'm military and recognize that I'm bringing story and content that's relevant and valuable to the reason you put me in front of your audience.
That's a mic drop moment. I am so glad I asked that question. That was a fantastic answer. So thank you. I mean, it's really made me, that's going to be very helpful to me because that is a concern, but that's a great context of an answer. So thank you so much. Okay, let's talk about this trademarked no-fail trust. It comes from your real world experience. Talk to us about where you came up with that. What is it exactly?
Yeah, so the idea of no-fail trust is in the heat of battle, I need to be able to know that you're going to deliver no matter what. When we're going out there to do these missions, we cannot fail. And trust is fundamental and foundational to how we get the mission done, whether that's in sales, whether that's in construction, banking, or flying airplanes, it doesn't matter. If I can't trust you to deliver when the heat is on, then I can't trust that we're going to be able to get this mission done. And so I was having a conversation with a good friend. He invited me on his podcast some years ago when I first got started in the business. And I didn't know what I was going to talk about, Gail. I thought that I was going to talk about my life story, growing up in inner city Oakland, going from the crack house to the cockpit. And then as I was telling him a story about what flying operations are like, he goes, that's it. That's what organizations need to understand and how to operate better. And here's the concept. In the back of our airplanes, our cargo airplanes, we have a young person, maybe 17, 18, 19 years old, fresh out of high school, video game expert, probably dwelling in someone's attic or their basement. But they join the military fresh out of high school, and we give them a responsibility of being in the back of our aircraft, and they're responsible for more than 80% of that aircraft. And when we're in the heat of battle, and I'm about to make the perfect landing, this young person, not being able to see what's going on up front, can give a command that's a directive, and they can say, go around. The moment that they say that, I don't pause, I don't hesitate, I don't question that young person. I immediately execute the maneuver and then figure out later what happened and why they gave me that command. That level of trust is what we call no-fail trust. We get there because of the training that we give them. We get there because of the processes that we instill in them. And we get there because we truly empower and trust them to execute the missions that we cannot fail all the time.
That is great. Yeah, there are some young people. My dad, he went into the Marines, and are you supposed to be 18? Or are you supposed to be 19? Whatever you're supposed to be. I think he might have snuck in a couple of weeks early, but talk about an incredible experience that shaped him as a human for sure. Let's see, when companies ask you to come and speak, do you find that fundamentally they have a problem that they're trying to solve? I mean, are you a good solution because companies are struggling with A, B, or C?
Interestingly enough, each time I connect with a client, I always want to have that conversation and ask them, why did you choose Jason? And I ask that question because it's so telling. And they'll say, well, sometimes they'll say, well, we liked your energy. Sometimes they'll say, we love the stories. And then sometimes they'll say, hey, when we listened and watched your videos and your content, we recognize some of the challenges that we're dealing with in our organization, and we know that you can help us surface some of those challenges and address some of those challenges. And so some of them might be a lack of trust, right? Recently, I did an event, a half-day workshop with a client after the CEO heard me speak at another event, and she called me in wanting me to work on trust and stabilizing their organization, their senior leader team. So I interviewed her and 7 of her senior leaders. I gave them a report. We did a half-day workshop. Well, I was able to uncover some of those different challenges between trust, communication, how people are leading, and accountability. And then other times when I'm brought in to do a keynote, people will say, well, we've been doing it the same way for a long time, but we need people to understand that we can't keep doing it the same way because we've always done it that way. And so I'm able to craft the stories in the keynote in a way that allows people to recognize that just because we always did it this way doesn't mean we have to keep doing it that way. And so, yes, oftentimes there are challenges that are under the surface. Sometimes they're very obvious challenges. And then when I have that conversation, I'll ask them various questions that allows them to tell me what those challenges and issues are. Like I said, trust, communication, connection, psychological safety, accountability. And then I put all that together and I curate what they're looking for in that keynote. And they come back and go, thank you, because you helped to surface and get the conversation started.
Right.
And then sometimes it leads to being able to do additional work with them because they say, we want the conversation to continue now that you've got it started.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a couple of things I want to ask you about what you just said. One, you said you interviewed the CEO and 7 or so of her direct reports. Is that typical when a client hires you, that you're going to do some internal interviews?
No, it's not typical. So it just depends on kind of it depends on how we set up the opportunity, the contract. It depends on what they really need and what they're looking for. And so that particular event was very unique and specific to the client and their needs. But I'm always willing to go deeper with an organization. For example, I have a client coming up and they want me to speak to their board, and they're going to do a panel with other CEOs. And I said, well, I tell you what, how about this? They wanted to get some of the CEOs that have been there for 20 plus years. And I says, let me make a suggestion. How about half of the panel are OGs or senior, CEOs, and then let's make the other half the young new CEOs, so we can get the old school and the new school. And then I'll add something for you guys to make sure this is done the right way. How about I interview all of the CEOs so that when I actually facilitate that panel, I actually come in prepared with even better questions. Yes. So that your board and your senior leadership, they get more out of it. And they were like, are you willing to do that? I'm like, absolutely.
You also earlier, you talked about doing the interviews, and I do understand that one was unique, but you distinguished that you have workshops and you have keynotes. So talk a little bit about that, because I think we're starting to get more and more requests for workshops. And so I'd like to know how you distinguish that and how someone decides whether or not to bring you in for a keynote or a workshop.
Great question, Gail. So, of course, I love the keynotes. The keynotes are fun, but let's be honest, a keynote lasts for that 45 to 60 minutes.
Exactly.
And what we're seeing now is people realizing that that's just the start. What's beyond the keynote? And so I'm starting to have clients to say, hey, Jason, we want this message to resonate more than just the one time or the few days afterwards. We want it to resonate for a long time. And then some people will say, we want you to do a workshop with our senior leadership team or a subset of our leadership team, because we want them to take the same things that you're talking about in the keynote, and we want to go deeper so that they can actually go deeper with their teams. And so those are some of the requests that I'm seeing. And then some people come to me straight away and say, look, can you do a combination of the keynote and the workshop? And I go, absolutely. So we can build where I'll do keynote, and then we'll package that into a half-day workshop. And so we can basically build whatever they're looking for based on their needs. And I think, to your point, as I'm sure you know, it's about the client knowing what's available, right? I can do more than just a keynote. Keynotes are great, but I'm capable of actually going far deeper in this subject. We could do some exercises that are going to actually resonate, and they're going to go a lot deeper than just a single hour of time, if that's within your budget and if that's what you want to be able to bring by way of time to your people.
I love that. You have a new book, No Fail Trust, the flight manual for building teams that deliver under pressure. What made you decide to write this book now? And what are you hoping that readers will walk away with?
Well, what made me decide to write it now was, one, I wanted to write it a long time ago, but my wife, my better two-thirds, the smarter of the two of us, she challenged me every step along the way. She says, Jason, don't write a sucky book. She says, there are enough garbage books that are on the bookshelves that are worthless, and don't write a book for the sake of writing a book, and don't do it just because you saw other people do it. So I listened to her wisdom and her wise advice, and she says, give yourself a few years at a minimum of getting deeper into your content, knowing what your clients need, knowing what the responses are from your events before you sit down and actually write something. And so over the course of time, I've been able to put all these things together. And so I decided that now was the right time to write the book. And in writing the book, it started off saying, okay, I'm going to take my keynote and I'm going to expand on it. And then it was like, okay, well, actually now we have research. So I've got statistically valid research that we use to help write the book. And this is stuff that I have a white paper on, that I can do events on for people, and I can pass it on to clients. But we put all that together and said, okay, what do I want people to get from this book? Sure. Well, I want them to take away the leadership lessons. I want them to take away that everybody has the capability of impacting their culture. I want that leader to think about, what's one thing that I could do differently starting today that would change the dynamic of my team. I want the frontline workers, when they read it, I want them to think, man, I can actually impact and change the culture of this organization. It might not be at breakneck fast speed, but I can change it by the things that I do each and every day. And so as I was sitting down writing the book, initially I was like, oh, I could put this and I could put all these things in there. And I got some wise advice. And the wise advice was, hey, check this out. If you can get each reader to just walk away with one thing that they're going to do differently as a result of reading your book, then your book is a success. And I'm confident that the amount of content that we've put into this book, the amount of thought that I've put into this work based on my lived experiences, based on some other great examples that we put in the book, that people will be able to walk away with one thing that they can do differently that will change them, change those around them, and change the culture of the organizations that they're in.
Well, that's a perfect setup for the last question that I was planning to ask you, and that is, if someone's listening and they want to take one small step today to start building stronger trust on their teams, where would you suggest they start?
I would start with connection. One of the phrases that I use, I put in the book, it's in my keynotes, and that is, earn your title of leader every single day.
Good.
Earn your title of leader every single day, from being a parent, being a significant other, being a leader in an organization, whether you have a title or not. You don't need a title to lead. You just need to earn that title of leader. But it starts with connection. And one of the things that I talk about when it comes to connection is donut moments. Well, that comes from daddy-daughter donut dates with my daughter and I. When my daughter was I think she was 2 years old, I decided to give this little kid a donut because I thought it'd be cool to watch a kid lick the icing and frosting off of a donut. Well, that turned into every Friday we would get donuts on the way to the daycare. And as she continued to grow and mature, it turned into conversations. That then turned into a level of connection. That connection that we built over donuts turned into commitment. That commitment then transitioned into accountability, and then it transitioned into trust. And so the one thing that I would encourage people to do to earn their title of leader starting now is to find the way to connect with the people around you. It might be a cup of coffee, it might be a bagel, it might be donuts. But when you start connecting with people, getting to know who they really are beneath the titles, beneath everything else, that allows you to actually connect with them. That leads to that commitment, which then leads to a level of mutual accountability and a level of mutual trust that will eventually get you to that place of being able to have no fail trust that when the heat is on and you're in the thick of it, in the combat of life, in the combat of business, the combat of sales, your people and you will be able to deliver no matter what.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jason. And for all of our event planners that are listening, if you're looking to find a speaker to bring them in to help your audience strengthen their trust, their accountability, and their performance, we would love to talk to you about Jason's availability and having him in front of your audience. Just reach out to us and let us know. Thank you so much, Jason, and happy flying. And we'll see you the next time you're in Dallas.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gil. It's an absolute pleasure to work with your team every time we get a chance to work together. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us on Backstage Pass with Gail Davis. Tune in for more exclusive interviews and pro tips to elevate your events. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts with us. We'll catch you next time behind the curtain on Backstage Pass.